Pilar, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We had a fun back and forth before all of this started about aliens and ghosts, and we're in that mode. It's almost Halloween, so why not? But welcome, and I'm going to read your bio so everybody understands and remembers who Pilar is. But if you don't know who she is, then you're not really paying attention, because you've been doing this for how long, Pilar, in terms of consulting and working with writers?
I don't know, so long. Like, I don't know. On the page since 20 years of my business, 12 years of the podcast. God, I'm old. But
oh no, not your experience, and you're a professional, and you're incredibly good at what you do. And anybody who's looking for a consultant, either one-on-one or to take some classes, you should check out onthepage.tv. And Pilar has done events for us before, both digital and live. So it's great to have you back. This is going to be fun.
Thank you.
We're gonna be talking about breaking the rules. Before I get into that, let's just hit some announcements. So everybody watching, whether you're an ISA member or not, these events are available. We have Friday, October 30th. The event is titled "What's Your Ghost Story?" This is All Hallows Eve, of course. Scott, who is on the mic right now, can't see him, but he and I are going to host the ISA Friday night presents event. We usually have them a little earlier, but we're going to go a little later, just because Halloween is a little bit more of an American holiday, and we're going to be talking about ghost, scary stuff. Thursday, November 5th is an ISA Writers Sprint hosted by Writers Block at 2 p.m. Los Angeles time. Friday, November 6th is Film Financing Demystified with Tyler Gould of Bondit Media Capital. That's going to be a good one, just because very few, myself included, writers really understand the film financing world. So I think it'll be good for everybody to tune into that. At the very least, watch the recording. Wednesday, November 11th, Get Pitch Ready with Suzanne Gunderson, just in time to get ready for our pitch panel with the ISA on November 19th. So you got to check out all these things. You can go to the ISA events page. We're posting events all the time, and they're all free for all of our members, whether you're a Connect member or not. We've made most of these events free during the pandemic, for whether you're a free registered ISA member or if you're a Connect member. So take advantage of these as much as you can. Okay, so Pilar, if I was going to read the bio, I kind of feel like I'd like to hear it in your own words, because it would just be me continually talking right now and you just watching me talk. So just give a little bit of a background on how you got your start, and then how you eventually moved into the consulting and on the page.
Well, I guess I got my start as a reader in the 90s, and then I started thinking it would be really interesting to figure out how to communicate to writers what's actually working and not working, and maybe how to create tools that could help them be better on the page, rather than constantly being the crusher of dreams and writing coverage and saying no. So I started teaching, and then I wrote a book with the teachings, and they seem to be working for writers. So I've been teaching now for years. Yes, I do consult one-on-one. I've recently changed over how I consult, and I'm happy to talk to people about that. Okay. But I love what I do. I love teaching. I teach feature film, TV, rewrite, and a bunch of other things, some pitching. And I do it now, these days, all online.
The irony of this wild year that we've experienced is that it has actually made people more accessible in a way, I mean, at the very least through the consulting side of the world and the educational side, but also on the industry side, which we don't need to go into too much, but there are people who are a little bit more willing, especially if you live in LA proper, to not have to drive from Santa Monica to Hollywood at 3:30 in the afternoon. You take a meeting over Zoom, and it's just so much easier, and you can actually take more meetings that way. So, if there are any positives there, I think this is allowing us to all connect a little bit more. And the ISA found that out pretty quickly. We rarely have this many events on a monthly basis, or at least in the past. We would have maybe one, maybe two live events, and then some podcasts and stuff. But now we're hosting so many events. And for the writers who don't live in Los Angeles or in a city that has a third Thursdays event that's hosted, you're all able to join us. So it's all good. So we're going to be talking about breaking the rules today.
Yes.
And Pilar has a PowerPoint, and she's going to walk everybody through it. Just as a reminder, we have 3 Q&A questions in the bottom little icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen here already, which is great. If you have any questions specifically about the writing process, put it in the Q&A portion of the Zoom page here, not in the comments, because it's really easy to miss those. Feel free, of course, to comment. You can still ask a question or two, but if you're not too concerned about getting it answered, put it in the comment section. But if you do have a question that you really want answered, put it in the Q&A. All right, so to segue us in, Pilar, I asked you a question prior to the start of this. Let's get into this. What is the worst advice that you've ever received?
The worst advice I ever received, and I won't say who gave it to me, was to maybe stop encouraging my writers to create female-driven projects because they would not sell.
Do you know a roundabout year when this was mentioned?
Later than you would think.
Wow.
Later than you would think, definitely within the past 10 years. Yes. I know, crazy, right?
What's crazy is the logic behind it, whether it's, current day, which now it's, everybody wants them.
Right.
Exactly. But the logic behind it is it's like 51% of your audience. I don't know how you wouldn't want to.
There was a time when people would vocally say this. This, of course, was whispered to me, and we hadn't yet gotten, I forget what the magical year was, but suddenly people were like, what would be a great hook? What if a woman was the lead? Like, that became the new thing. Instead of going, I like it, but could we have a man in the lead? So that was very interesting to me, and I'm kind of glad I just sort of stuck to my guns. It's certainly not the only thing I encourage people to write. But at one point, I was trying to get people to think, like, what if it was a woman? Like, it was so radical. And so, yes, I got the advice, like, maybe you shouldn't,
Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, I mean, it's crazy. But I think the lesson there is, the old cliche, write what you want to watch, and try to, tell the story that you want to tell, regardless of what other people are thinking. I mean, that usually goes along, don't listen to other people's advice in negative sense. But in terms of what we're talking about tonight, the rules, so maybe, and I'm sure you're going to hit this, but let's do a little bit of a preface of what you mean by the rules. Is this the literal writing, or is this industry, business rules? Maybe we differentiate.
It's mostly writing, because that's my comfort zone. I'm not a career coach, I'm a writing coach. And what I find is that writers have these rules in their head that they think they have to follow. They read it in a book somewhere, they were told something at some point, and it really paralyzed them. And it's interesting, because what we're also looking for is something that's unique and special and different. So how are you going to get that if you are paying attention to every single rule all the time?
Right.
So that's why I wanted to talk about, well, what are they? Why are they there? And why should you maybe consider breaking one of them?
Okay. At least one.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started. Was there anything else you wanted to mention before we jump in?
I'm going to run a PowerPoint and go through a sort of a small class with you guys.
Yeah.
So at the end of that, that's when I'm going to be taking questions. So I'm not ignoring your questions. This should go for about 45 minutes or something like that. And then we'll open it up to everybody's questions, and then I'm happy to answer. So what we're going to talk about is the rules, okay? The rules that at least writers think they're supposed to follow. But it bears some interest to think about, well, why are they there to begin with? Then we're going to talk about why you should break them, or at least one of them, how you can break them, and how breaking them can break bad, so you want to break them with care. Now, talking about why are these rules here? Well, they're there to remind you of patterns and rhythms of successful screenplays and TV shows. So a lot of times when people are writing books or teaching, okay, they've looked at tons of screenplays and they've found certain patterns. And so what they're doing is communicating those patterns to you, and they sometimes will come off as rules, or somebody will turn them into rules, okay? So that's one of the reasons that this rule of structure tends to be there. Another reason that rules are there are to help you organize your thoughts and your story, to keep you from overwriting, to stay within a form that translates to other areas of the industry. So the idea that this is a script that is going to translate to a reader, an executive, an actor, a director, a producer, a production person. So the idea of having some kind of common form. And the rules are there to remind you of what the audience is expecting. Okay, so that's why they're there to begin with, or what the good intentions were behind them. Okay, but why should you break the rules? Because, as I mentioned, you're always looking for that one thing that sets your script apart. People want something that's different. Also, because writing to formula can kill your story, okay? Doesn't mean that you want to not think about the patterns and the rhythms that people are conveying to you, but writing to a formula, Also, because you want to keep the reader and the audience from getting too comfortable, from making it seem like your work is going to be too predictable. And why break the rules? Because you secretly want to. Now, should you break all the rules? No. Okay? No, you're not going to do all of anything. Okay? The idea is to know your craft and then to gently and purposefully break at least one rule. So we're going to start with voiceover, because this is something people ask me about all the time. So why is the rule of never use voiceover there to begin with? Well, because film is a visual medium, as you know, show it, don't tell it. Because leaning on voiceover encourages the writer to be lazy with storytelling. Okay, and then also because voiceover has the potential to create a static shot. So remember, as you're hearing this voice suddenly come through, what are we watching? Okay, so this is why you've heard the rule of never break voiceover. Why should you break the rule of never use voiceover? Because really well-crafted voiceover can bring poetry into a scene, because the voiceover provides the opportunity to convey what the dialogue and the scene direction cannot, and because it creates an all-knowing or truth-telling character for the audience, somebody that we can trust. And it can streamline an epic story by filling in the timeline. If you think about a classic movie like Shawshank Redemption, okay, and what the voiceover brought to that movie, all of these things. It brought in poetry, okay? It brought in things that the action and the dialogue could not, because these were men in prison. So it brought in this other sort of emotional element that maybe could not have been brought in by the characters speaking themselves. It does create this all-knowing or truth-telling character for the audience. We come to really rely on that voiceover to tell us the truth. And it streamlined this really epic story, which went over, I think it was decades. I'm not sure. Sorry, but it leapt from era to era. Now, how would you break voiceover creatively? First of all, make sure that your voiceover is balanced throughout the script. So if you're going to use it to help you tell your story, and suddenly we've got a whole first act that's just loaded with voiceover, but then it goes away, well, it's like a character going away. We've become used to it. So make sure it's balanced throughout the script. Make sure that it is tonally consistent with the genre that you're in. Make sure your voiceover doesn't switch tense. This is a bit of a pet peeve on my part, where sometimes somebody seems to be talking from a safe place in the future, but then suddenly they switch to the idea that maybe they're in the here and now, and it's their own, the character's thoughts being spoken out loud. So watch your tenses, okay? Make sure and do a little tense pass with your voiceover. And make sure also that your voiceover is bringing a new element or information into the scene. Now, how can breaking it break bad? How can having voiceover break bad? When writers write too much of it, okay? And suddenly they're leaning on it, okay? It's the thing about voiceover is a little goes a long way. You can literally go into your voiceover chunks, pick a sentence, okay? And you're good. Also, when clumps of voiceover compete with clumps of scene direction, what I would suggest instead is that you actually sort of layer between action, voiceover, so that we're seeing as you're telling, okay? It also can break bad when you're telling us what we're clearly seeing anyway, and that is annoying, as you know, as somebody who watches movies and TV, or when you're narrating a story like it's an epic novel. Now we're going to go into another rule that you might hear about, which is no emotion in scene direction. Absolutely no emotion in scene direction. Well, why is it there? To keep writers from getting too introspective and telling us things that can't be seen on the screen, and to prevent writers from doing the actor and director's job. Okay, but this is one rule that I particularly rebel against and I'm not happy with. I think you should break this rule because readers and audience track story through emotion. How are we going to understand what the story means unless we see how it emotionally hits a character? Because emotional writing is poetic writing, and because emotion conveys character motivation. Okay, now a little goes a long way, but it is absolutely fine to have emotion plus action in your scene direction. Now, how to do this? Now, you could add emotion to an action line. Even one word up front can change the meaning. So, for example, if the line is just she leaves the room, okay, well, that's the action. But if you add an emotion, furious, she leaves the room. Puzzled, she leaves the room. Satisfied, she leaves the room. These are 3 different stories being told. Or we could heighten the verb because the action alone can suggest the emotion. She storms from the room. She shuffles out of the room. She struts out of the room. And if it's really super important, you can mix emotional descriptions with heightened verbs. Furious, she storms from the room. Okay, absolutely fine. Okay, but look at how one sentence is taking taking you to exactly the emotional place where the character is. You don't need more than that, because this is where it can break bad, okay? When the writer creates too much business between the lines that cause the eye to wander all over the page, okay? So I've given you permission here to write emotionally, and then you can't stop, okay? Where you're constantly interrupting the scene with emotional moments, okay? Give us one that really tell the story. Another way it can break bad is when the scene direction becomes too flowery. And this is why you got the rule to begin with, is it can break bad when the writer overwrites the internal. So the example here is, furious, she storms from the room, reminding herself never to come back to this restaurant. Now that part of it, okay, that was overly internal. Furious, she storms from the room, works, but reminding herself never to come back to this restaurant, that's for the novel. I'm going to talk now about writing linear versus writing nonlinear. The rule of the story must be linear. Well, why is it there? Well, to keep the story focused, to keep the tension rising, and to make the read easier. But why break that rule? Because nonlinear storytelling creates an unpredictable through line, and we want things to be unpredictable. It keeps the reader turning the page. It keeps audience members on the edge of their seats. Okay. Also, a nonlinear storyline, the perspective will change. And you can play with time and place to do that. And why break the rule of linear writing? Because you can, okay? Because film editing is your friend, okay? And if you decide to write in a nonlinear way, all right, then we're gonna have a really interesting story. Now, how to break it? That's the thing, okay? Keep your story linear, but one way to do it might be to work backwards or write two linear storylines from different points of view. I'm looking at some old slides here. I don't like the way I phrase this at all. I'm going to have to rewrite it when I'm done. Okay, so one way is to write nonlinear and to break this rule of that the story must be linear is you start and you work backwards. Okay, so that you're working in a very linear fashion, but backwards, kind of like oh my God, help me out. What's the movie?
Memento. Memento.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much. Memento. So that's one way. Another thing here you're seeing is write two linear storylines from different points of view. Okay, so it could be that it seems nonlinear, but it's actually two different storylines going on from different points of view and happening at the same time. So they're parallel. Okay. Another way to break it is to move just one event. You could move the third act climax or the midpoint event up to the very first page, then start your story again and work in a linear way back up to the event, okay? And another way to do it is to structure a really super tight linear storyline without one story whole, and then break it up and shift around the pieces. Okay, so going back to the classic movie Pulp Fiction, which everybody thinks about with nonlinear writing, if you put all those pieces together, it is a really tight storyline without one story whole. Make sure that's there first, and then you can mix it up. Okay, sorry about that slightly bumpy explanation, sort of a nonlinear explanation of writing nonlinear. So how can breaking this rule break bad? Well, writing backwards can be confusing unless you first explore the story moving forward through cause and effect. So make sure, okay, that you can tell this story backwards. Okay, that's why Memento works so well. It had been worked out so well in terms of cause and effect going forwards that we could flip it. Okay. Now, if you move several events around, major turning points can be missed. So you might think you're being artistic, but the script will frustrate readers. Okay, so if you're just writing nonlinear to be cool, and then somebody says, I don't understand your story, that's kind of a bummer because you have a story to tell. And in the process of trying to be so artistic about it, you failed to tell that story. So be careful. You're moving tons of events around. You might actually miss the whole spine of the story. If you do shift the pieces around, okay, and haven't created that tight linear storyline first, your script will implode. Okay, so go for nonlinear, but make sure it is super tight to begin with. Okay, so here is a new rule. The rule here is the main character must do something in the first act to be likable. And I know many of you are really, really, really believe in that and try really hard to create something that will make them likable. Now, why is that rule there? It is there to make the audience root for the character and or get behind the character's eyes. That makes sense. It's also there to make us feel there's a possibility for redemption for the character. So even if they're not the most likable person in the world, we've seen them do one likable thing. It's also there to show a crack in his or her tiny heart and to give us information to pay off later. But why break it? Because we secretly admire characters who take risks and say shocking things. Because a super flawed character better deserves the second act trouble he or she might get into. So it's sometimes we can wait. It's okay sometimes not to show this little moment of redemption in the first act. They could be terrible, but we have a whole movie to make them better. Okay, and they may get into a certain kind of trouble at the end of Act One, okay, that they deserve, all right, in order, and that becomes their movie. Okay? Another reason to break it is because a defined character is often stronger than one who lives in the gray areas, and because imposing a nice moment on a character can feel inauthentic and take the reader or audience out of the moment. Now, how to do this, okay? Create a bigger jerk. Make somebody in your script more unlikable than your main character. The pushy boss, the selfish girlfriend, the womanizing friend. Show the context, okay? The audience, luckily, is privy to the big picture. So show us the context of his or her bad mood, and we'll be on the character's side. Remember, your job is not to make characters likable. It is to make us empathize with a character, make them relatable in some way. And sometimes we relate to people acting out in bad ways because we understand the context, something that pushed them there. Okay. Think about Breaking Bad. I mention it all the time because I love it so much. Okay, but we have seasons and seasons of watching a character do a bad thing based on a couple of episodes in the first season about why he felt he had to cook drugs in the first place to save his family economically. And we bought into it, and then we were off. Okay. And number 3, balance flaw with skill. You want to show something the main character does really well. Often that flaw is a result of the pressure of that skill. And sometimes that skill can't be present without giving into the flaw. So an example I tend to use in my TV class is Nurse Jackie, just because I loved that so much. Okay. So her flaw was she was a really, really good nurse, Nurse Jackie. But her flaw was that she was also a drug addict. Now, she couldn't beat drugs being in a medical world, okay? And she couldn't be a great nurse without being there either, okay? So watching her balance her flaw and her skill every week was what was interesting about the show, okay? But it also made us forgive her over and over again because she was so good at what she does. Now, how can breaking this rule break bad? Okay, when you fail to put something likable about a character in the first act? Well, if you are unaware that your character is flawed, if you think his selfishness or his cruelty or his misogyny is cool, then you're in danger of being unlikable. Or sometimes extending the flaw too far beyond the first act. This definitely applies more to feature than to TV. If something doesn't happen once Act 2 begins that, at the very least, challenges the main character to be better, then you might be in danger of flaw overkill. Here's another rule that you hear all the time, which is that all characters need a backstory. So why is that rule there? Well, to help us understand and identify with the character and to create a life context when he or she does something wrong. Now, why break it? Because action and choice help us get to know a character better than the stories they lived through before page 1. Anybody who's taken a class with me knows that I am not patient with people who dwell on backstory. Really want to see the character in action. Audiences are smart. They will figure it out as we watch a character. Okay, so seeing them make interesting choices in the moment is even better than pages of backstory. Okay. Another reason to break it is because the pace of a script can get bogged down when the writer stops to rehash the past. And another reason to break it is because the devices that relay backstory, like monologue or flashback, can feel old-fashioned and contrived. So how to do this? How to break it? If characters were influenced by specific eras during which they grew up, give them behaviors reflective of those time periods, okay? So if you're trying to say that this is somebody who peaked in the 80s, you can imagine the music they listen to, the clothes they wear, things like that. Okay. Another way to break this rule, make sure your characters react to the characters and world around them. We get to understand characters and their backstory through their emotional responses. Okay, if somebody's extremely bigoted, for example, it may be reflective of how he grew up, where he grew up, that kind of thing. So it's bringing his backstory in with him. Another way to break this rule of backstory is to remember that familiarity or awkwardness between characters convey a relationship history. Okay, you don't need them to stop and talk about, hey, remember that time that we dated back in college? Okay, we'll see that. We'll start to understand that there's a familiarity between these characters. And another way to do this is to show the characters' stages of life and how they live, where and how they work, who they're friends with, etc. Now, how can breaking this break bad if you don't choose to shout out the backstory? How can breaking it break bad? Well, if writers dangle a backstory mystery and then never reveal the truth, like a setup that never pays off, well, that's not going to work. You're going to have to pay that off. If there's the suggestion of conflict in a relationship that's never satisfactorily revealed through behavior. So you get these people and they have a history and they seem to be resentful, one's resentful of the other, and yet that's never really answered for us. Sure, bring in the backstory, explain it eventually. Another way it can break bad is if the ending or third act hinges on a backstory secret and you haven't alluded to it or dealt with it in any way. So this is where suddenly the backstory comes rolling in the third act and you never set it up. And it's because, Pilar, you told me I shouldn't talk about backstory. Well, if the third act is all about the backstory, then by all means, please bring it in or feed it throughout or make sure that we've got enough hints and evidence so that by the time we get there, it all makes sense. So I'm going to do a little true or false with you right now, okay? True or false? Character description must be physical and include age, okay? False. Especially when you're writing leading men and women, emphasize personality rather than physicality and age. So sassy Sally, sassy and street smart, okay? That's got some punch to it, which is much different than Sally, a 25-year-old brunette, okay? Also, when you're physicalizing people or adding age when you don't need to, then you're also limiting casting. Now, remember, sometimes people are defined by their age, okay? A 16-year-old, for example, you really need to say what age that, just saying a teenager is too open, okay? But sometimes there's sort of an ageism that comes in when we are assigning certain ages to leading men and leading women. If it can be open, get rid of it, okay? Again, same thing with the physical, okay? Give us personality instead, and it will also be wider open to a more diverse casting. True or false? Act breaks and events must fall on certain pages. False. It is formulaic to have exact events on exact pages. Okay, and I'm willing to fight about that. Your job is to write a script where they don't notice the page numbers at all. Okay, so if you start getting a little page number note, it might be because they got bored and they started looking at the page number and going, wait, where are we? Oh my gosh, it's page 35 and we haven't even gotten into Act 2. That's where you're going to get a page note. It's not because your act break has to fall at page 30. Okay. True or false? Your feature script must be 120 pages or less. False. Your feature script must be 110 pages or less. That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, true or false? You should never write music into a script. It's true and false. So the true part is that scoring your own movie makes for a weird read. Okay, so when if music suddenly played over this scene, okay, you'd be like, what's with the music? Okay, it takes the reader out of the scene. It has nothing to do with the story. Okay, now the false part is you can mention a song name when it comes from a source within the scene. Just prepare to have it replaced in production. So for example, if someone's rocking out to a very specific song in their bedroom, okay, fine, you could say what the song is. Just know that it might have to be replaced in production. That's fine. If it's a karaoke scene and somebody gets up and they sing a specific song, that's fine too. So if the song itself is part of the story of the scene, that's absolutely fine to call out what song it is. True or false? Actors cross out anything in parentheses. And that is, what does it say there? True. And if you want to avoid this possibility, make sure that the parentheses are only included when a line has to be read a certain way and could otherwise be misread. Okay, so for example, if you had a line like, get out of here for Amy, okay? Well, most of the time we would read that with anger. So we need the parentheses that says laughing, get out of here, because otherwise it would be misread as anger. That's pretty much the only time a parentheses needs to be there. Now, if the line was meant to be angry and you put in parentheses angry, well, you're telling us what we know already, okay? And that actor has every right in the world to go, this writer is over directing me. I'm going to just cross out anything in parentheses now. True or false? All characters have to have a name. False. Some characters simply serve the scene and are never seen again, and naming them gives them too much importance. So the waiter should not be Hank unless Hank is going to be a character the reader continues to track throughout the script. And I think a lot of readers will tell you this, that, you know, when you're constantly naming people, mentally you go, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this character and this character and this character, but then that character never comes in again. So it's absolutely fine if they're only serving the scene as the waiter, the bartender, the receptionist, whatever, to call them by that profession. True or false? Avoid writing camera direction whenever possible. Ready? True. Camera direction gets in the way of storytelling. Because if you say something like close up on David's face, well, what does that mean? Close up on David's face. What story is David's face telling? But if you say David's face fills with rage, well, it's an emotional moment. You're telling a story, and what's the natural camera direction? Well, of course, it's going to go close up to get there. True or false? Never let your character utter a direct line. It's on the nose. Well, it's true and it's false. Okay, the true part is that dialogue does sound weird when characters just say their thoughts out loud or their feelings out loud. I'm so attracted to you. I am jealous of you. I'm only pretending to like you. If we went around saying the truth all the time, you know, we'd be thrown out of every room that we're in. Okay, so it feels on the nose, it feels wooden. So that's the true part about writing in a direct fashion. But the false part is that sometimes after pages of subtlety and innuendo, one honest statement can nail an act break or be an emotional game changer. You can't handle the truth. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father, prepare to die. I love that line and I can't even say it. As God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again. Get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape. Okay, so the idea is that it all sometimes comes down to one truthful statement. This is why I teach writing and not acting. Okay, now the conclusion of all this is that rules are meant to be broken, but only break them knowing why the rule is there to begin with and how to avoid breaking bad. And please don't break a whole bunch of rules just to be artistic. Instead, break one and see how doing so helps make your script truly special. And remember that good storytelling comes first. Now, I want to remind you that you can email me for slides of this class. I will send you all the slides that you see in front of you. Just go to pilar@onthepage.tv and just put in the header ISA slides, and I will send them to you. I do teach online classes. I would love to be able to put you on my mailing list so that I could just tell you when the next class is coming up. Also, I do a newsletter around once a month where I have some tips or tricks or links to some of my podcast episodes. My podcast is called On the Page, and you can find it anywhere that you get podcasts. And lastly, this is for my publisher. I have a book called The Coffee Break Screenwriter Breaks the Rules. So, it's a little book, it can be read in one sitting, okay? And then that book is also a follow-up to this book, which is called The Coffee Break Screenwriter, okay? I think that's about it. That's the end of my commercial. I'm going to stop share and open this up to questions.
Well, I think you should end all of your classes with that bell.
It's sometimes the PowerPoint, if you're doing many things, it's like, no, stop. So sorry, guys.
No, I thought it was perfect. It's almost like Pavlov's dog reaction of like, oh, we're done now. That was great. Everybody should subscribe to Pilar's newsletter, email list. I think we should all be, just paying attention to what everybody has to teach. Pilar is a strong voice in the consulting industry, so you should be paying attention. And I've seen a lot of comments where people are like, yeah, I saw her stuff on YouTube, and check everything out that she has to. Yeah, Jonathan just said, just subscribe. So there you go. You got at least one, Pilar.
Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it.
That was solid. So I have a couple little things I kind of want to bring up too. We have a few questions here in the Q&A portion.
Okay.
So one thing I get asked a lot, and I kind of want to know your opinion is on this, the use of continuous in a scene heading.
Okay. So look, I don't have a problem with it at all. I find it's a lot more helpful than constantly saying day, because I don't really know which day it is. So if I see continuous, and then day, I know it's a new day. But another thing that I think is pretty cool about contemporary formatting is you could knock off time of day altogether. So we just have interior place and then continue to just not have any time of day at all until we reset to a new day. So I don't have a problem with it, but you don't need it.
I see a lot of writers not even worry about the interior, exterior. Like if we know they're in the house, the character is moving into a different room, you just say hallway hyphen and bam, now we know we're in the hallway. So I like the way you put that in terms of the contemporary scene heading. And the use of continuous, from what I was taught even in film school, it was a little bit more of a production related reference in that there's no cut in the camera. We're moving from dining room into the living room and it's a continuous shot.
Mm-hmm.
So there are any number of ways. And I think it's just a good example of, there are rules, but as long as the pattern stays the same or you're using them in ways that the reader can understand, then breaking the rules totally fine. But it doesn't work when you pull the reader out and you're like, wait a minute, what's that? Oh God, we've got a page worth of voiceover or all this,
Right. When you're being inconsistent. And what you said about not having interior exterior at all is known as, sometimes it's called the minor slug line, sometimes it's called the secondary scene header. Usually you have sort of an umbrella scene header like interior nightclub night, right? But let's say that there's different scenes going on in the nightclub, but you don't want to constantly reset. You could have something at the bar, something at the dance floor, the hallway, so that things keep moving that way.
Mm-hmm. And as a reader, I mean, we read so much material on a regular daily basis in a literal sense that it's really easy to be taken out of the script. And the reader's brain tends to get reset when a whole new proper scene heading is there. Interior, bathroom, day. It does something to the reader's brain where it's like, oh, okay, new scene. But then you actually realize, oh no, wait, this is a continuation of the previous one. So it becomes an art form at that point where you're trying to allow the reader to experience it, as opposed to here, I just have to follow all the rules that some book from 1981 told me to do,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Alex asks, do you think because of COVID, us writers should be concentrating on TV or streaming series rather than features?
No. I think COVID is, look, by the time that you've finished your feature, and by the time it gets into the right hands, and by the time it's developed, COVID will be long over and we'll be onto a brand new pandemic. So
Right.
no, I don't think that you should focus on one over the other.
Yeah, I think that's the timeline is such a good point. I remember the writer's name is Liwa Nasserdeen. He wrote on the Goldbergs, and he came in and spoke to a class that I was teaching, and he was just great. And what he said that has always stuck with me, he said that we're not in control of our timeline, meaning when our success is going to come. All we have control over is what we write and have passion for.
Right.
Once you get the script out of town, you have no idea what's going to happen. You really just don't know anymore. From a literal and practical sense, I know specifically that there are a lot of features now going to the streamers. I mean, the theaters just are they're not showing in movies, so they have to be showing these features somewhere. So no, I think that's it's good advice. Don't write just because you think there's a trend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For anything. Yes.
Right. Okay, Jonathan says, in this new world of premium TV, WGA agent strike leading to more mentorship of unsigned writers, and then Me Too and BLM, pandemic. So what opportunities or dynamics related to storytelling and hiring have opened up, and which, if any, have closed up? So have you seen new opportunities with everything happening?
Gosh, I have not seen, from, again, my pool of writers and that I work with, and I teach a bunch of them and consult on 3 or 4 scripts a day sometimes. I haven't seen any opportunities close off because of COVID. Now, I have seen production stop, and I have one very successful director who was asked to do a bit of a COVID pass on a script to try and figure out how to separate characters more. I think that I can speak to this more on maybe a storytelling level, which is don't run away from what just happened to us. Okay, that if you're writing and thinking about, I'm just going to ignore that COVID ever happened, but it's a contemporary story, by all means, put that in. If it's 5 minutes from now and you believe that there's going to be a vaccine, fine, but the idea that people might be more careful with each other, that we might see masked people on the street, I think it will only make your project more interesting. So that kind of goes away from the career, unfortunately, because I'm not completely sure how to answer that question. But I will say that, don't back off from what's happening right now. Do integrate it into your scripts, into your stories, and to what also is going to happen to us, to your characters going forward.
Yeah, I think unique storytelling has always been king and queen. It's always what the industry has been looking for, a unique story. So new opportunities, there are always going to be new opportunities. There are always going to be opportunities that are closing. So it's, all right, thanks for the question, Jonathan. Let's see. Liz is asking, what's the current attitude about flashbacks?
Well, I didn't include it in this, but I feel the same way about flashbacks that I do with voiceover. I think flashbacks can be excellent storytelling devices. And just like voiceover, I feel like you should be consistent with it. Also, I think with flashbacks, make sure that it is telling its own story going forward. So you've decided that you're going to just flash to different pieces of a puzzle that's eventually going to reveal who the murderer is. first of all, think about going linear so that the flashback is making sense. Second, give us only a flash of something. Don't give us huge, long scenes, okay? And make it all add up in the end so that this flashback story becomes its own storyline. So yeah, I think flashback can be extremely helpful when you need it, and that you shouldn't back off from it if you do.
Yeah. When it's just exposition, it gets a little boring.
Right. When you're just showing us something that it's like, you're showing us, most of the time it's backstory when people go wrong with it. It's like, you know, okay, for example, a PTSD character. We can imagine, we know that that person was a soldier. We know that he fought in a certain war. We see the behavior. We may not need the flashback of the moment that created the PTSD.
Right.
Okay. So it's that kind of stuff that's actually slowing down your script more than you think it is.
Great. Sandrine asks, do you have any advice for how to get managers and executives on board when you write something that breaks the rules and goes against the norm?
I think the writing itself will get managers on board because they'll go, whoa, I didn't see that coming. Okay. And that's what a manager agent's looking for.
Great. Love it. Alicia, when pitching new ideas, do you need a pilot episode written?
For TV? Yes. So with TV, it's pilot plus pitch. So either you're going to, you know, get the attention of somebody and have a pitch of the series, and they're going to be interested in the series, and they're just going to say, great, I want to read the pilot. Or you have a awesome pilot and they say, wonderful, I want to read, I want a pitch of the series. Which is why in my writing TV class, we do both things. But anyway, you really do need that pilot episode. And it's because everybody has a good idea, but they want to see, like, what does the show really look like? What does it read like? Even if after you've sold it, perhaps they bring on a more experienced showrunner who may not even use that pilot. It's still, the pilot is a major selling tool. So you do need to write it.
Yeah. One thing I have learned this year is that in TV animation, I should put the emphasis on animation, that you don't need the script written. Depending on some adult TV shows like you know, Futurama or you know, a Simpsons type of adult animated show, sometimes you need the pilot to match. But for most age range of animation, you don't need the pilot to go along with it. But yeah, for live action, regardless of medium and genre, yeah, you're going to need the pilot there.
I think if it's animation and they're not taking it on pilot, they really need the visuals though. Definitely. So in a way, when you think about, like, what are you creating? In live action, you're creating a pilot, that's your art, right? But in animation, you're painting the characters, right. Literally. Right? They need to see that. So going in only on pitch and idea is still not going to work. You still need to see what the animated characters will look like. That's their product.
Totally. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying that. Because yeah, so don't just have an idea and go, great, I'm ready to pitch. You're going to have to still have a lot of work to do. Let's see. So Vincent, I write romantic comedies inspired by the classic rom-coms of the 30s and 40s. Is that an angle a bit too unusual for the current mindset?
Look, I don't know what the current mindset is right now. Yeah. Write it well, and people will go, wow, this really pays homage to the screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s. Who wouldn't want to see that? You know, everyone's so worried about trends. Okay, that goes with that rule, those rules in their heads. Okay, let them go. By the time you chase the trend is over anyway. Okay, and if you heard, like, oh, romantic comedies are out, well, guess what? Now Netflix has a whole platform dedicated to romantic comedies. They're back. So you might as well write what you want. And I love the idea of doing it in old 30s, 40s fashion. I think that could be really fun.
Yeah, totally. I've always wanted to remake the old road movies with Bob Hope and
Bing Crosby.
Bing Crosby, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, that's great. Who would you cast for that team instead?
Good question. Probably, oh God, shoot, he's on Saturday Night Live. He turned into a really big star. He was, no, can't, I like this guy.
That guy on that show.
Yeah, it didn't come up. Oh, I can picture him, and he's so great.
I bet people have stuff so somebody said Will Ferrell, somebody said Jim Carrey. Nick said it's not our job to cast actors, which is true. Absolutely.
It is true.
If there is one rule, it is not your job to put the casting in the script. However, you can certainly have a dream cast in your head and will help you with the voices when you're writing the dialogue.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with sort of creating your little mood board for what do you
fun.
hope. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And now that you say that, now I'm going to have to think of who I would want to put that in there, because it wouldn't be like slapsticky kind of like, I love Jack Black, but it's not a Jack Black type of comic in those. Anyway.
Yeah.
Alicia is asking specifically about your class. So will the next online TV class begin after the new year? I know one just started this last weekend.
One just started. So it's 4 classes. Class 1 started on Saturday. If any of you want to jump in, I can send you the recording for last Saturday and all the materials, and then you can come on in this Saturday for class 2. So you actually won't be behind and you can see everything. And I'm happy to offer a discount for that. So you can get right in touch with me by email if you're interested in that. But yes, the feature class, the TV class, and the rewrite class will all start up again from January on. And in December, it's not on the website yet, I hope to be doing maybe a one-off story analysis class, because I haven't done that in a while. And cool. I think it would be fun for writers.
Yeah, great. Email again, Pilar at?
onthepage.tv. Great. And the website is onthepage.tv for everything.
Cool. I'm seeing 40 questions in the queue. We only had 23 when we started. We're going to go maybe another 10 minutes, everybody. So I apologize if we can't get to all the questions. I'll try to get through these as quickly as we can. Joe is asking, besides voiceover, what's your opinion of using pre-lapse and post-lapse? How can you use them correctly?
I do find that pre-lapse are distracting in the writing. I think I can totally see it. When it's edited, I totally get that pre-lap, but it also gets in the way of the button of your scene, because you want your scene to land on something. And if it landed and it made its point, especially emotionally, and then suddenly there was a pre-lap just to be cool, you lose sight of what that scene was about. So I'm not a huge fan of them when I'm reading them.
Yeah, beautiful. So Emily's asking, and maybe you can go into a little bit more on flashbacks. When should flashbacks be shared? We kind of talked about that a little bit, but anything additional?
Well, I mentioned when they're telling their own story at the same time, maybe, something that is a mystery that's threading through. Another place where I think they're really useful is when they tell the truth. So if you've got a comedy and consistently people are lying to each other, and then we have a little flash of what the truth was, that can be a really fun comic device that pops up. But again, do it consistently.
Family Guy kind of perfected that, where it's the cut to, which is a ridiculous thing. I don't even know if you want to call it a flashback, but yeah. Let's see. Betty, this is a good question, because it's a difficult one to answer, but in a lot of ways, it's also formulaic. So Betty's asking, what's the ideal number of pages for a half-hour TV comedy dramedy? She's asking 26 pages or maximum. A lot depends here.
Okay, before we do that, somebody put in the comments, Pilar at onthepagetv.com, and that's wrong. It's Pilar at onthepage.tv. Okay? Onthepage.tv. That's what you do. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Okay. And it's also, if you just go to onthepage.tv, you'll find my email there too. Just, everything really goes to me. I don't have people.
Yeah, right.
Not a big shot like Max. Okay, so the question about page count for half-hour single cam, you can go 30 to even 35 pages, no more than that. And the reason is because some pages are a minute per page, and some are actually 30 seconds per page because of the way dialogue goes. So it really is okay for single camera to go up to that page count, but I would maybe aim for 30. when you're thinking about like a sitcom, which tends to be 22 minutes, then we have that in sitcom format, which is double spaced and capitalized. And so that tends to be about 45 pages because it's only 22 minutes and each page is 30 seconds.
Interesting. I have not heard that angle with the double space 45 pages. So that's good to know, because I always think of the general format where it's not double spaced, and then you're hitting the 26, 27 page mark for a network type of show, a sitcom. Okay, interesting. So now that template though for the sitcom, I think Final Draft has a template for that.
Yeah, so what you want to look for is multi-camera. Okay, you
Yeah.
want to only if you're doing multi-camera, not if you're doing a dramedy or single cam thing where you feel like you have lots of locations. If it looks like The Big Bang Theory and that's what you're writing, that's what we're talking about with multi-cam, and
Right.
that's what tends to have like 45 pages on it because it goes like that. There isn't a lot of scene direction that's breaking anything up.
Okay, cool. Marilyn is asking, I remember I took a seminar with you several years ago through the ISA, regarding putting in race to character descriptions. You advised against leaving it out unless absolutely necessary. You know, the best actor, regardless of race, should be hired for the role. Do you still, in today's world, advise that?
Okay, so at the time, and actually now, I mean, there's sort of two ways to go here. I believe in describing a character in terms of their essence, their personality, and hopefully that the casting director is creative enough to make sure that it's a diverse cast because we live in a diverse world. Okay, and that personality will bring in more diversity because when you're putting too much physical description in, you may not even realize, but you may be describing a white character. Okay, so open it up. Another issue that I have is sometimes people will be like, oh, I wrote a black character and I'm putting black in there, right? And then I say, well, does that mean that everybody else is white? So if you are going to put race in there, okay, remember, put the race and ethnicity of everybody then, okay? It will also make you aware of the fact that you might be creating this white world where you have a couple of token characters. So make sure and put it in there. There is one more thing to talk about, which is sometimes you have a character that really does need to be a certain race or ethnicity or gender because their experience in life has been defined by being that race or ethnicity or gender. Just saying, oh, their personality, let the chips fall where they may, is not going to be helpful to how you want to tell the story. That makes complete sense. Because our stories are also different based on how people view us and our experiences in the world. But again, in that case, I would say, make sure that you're doing it for every character, okay? Describe them, you know, and, oh, can I say one more thing about it?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And that is that race is not a personality. So if you say, Max, black, 30, okay, all right, that is not his personality. That's his race, that's his age, that's his name, and give me a personality, please. Okay, because I do see that from time to time, and it's way more offensive than you think it is.
Right. Okay, I'm going to try to focus on some like formatting kind of questions here specific to the page. Let's see. Jessica, are parentheticals in reference specifically to beat, parentheses beat, in a piece of dialogue something that should be avoided?
You know, I have no problem with it. If you're writing a long monologue, okay, and then suddenly there's a tonal adjustment, having beat right in the center of that monologue can be helpful because it means take a breath. It means adjust the tone. I would look at, if you're doing it constantly, maybe you're overwriting your dialogue. So look at that first. And then if you do have these long passages and they need the beat, you've got my blessing on it.
Yeah. I have a very specific approach to this next question, but I'm curious to see what you think, because everybody's different. So there is really, I think, personally, no right answer. But What is your opinion on using specific time of day, such as morning, afternoon, evening, as they do have different feeling and lighting connotations in the scene headings?
I wouldn't get overly busy. I you know, I don't, it really doesn't bug me either way. But when people are doing things like 2 hours later, you know, magic hour, it does start to feel a little bit busy to me. What do you think? Because you think you have it.
I agree. I think it should be with a very specific reason. And I always use the show 24 as an example that show specifically, you need the time, and
Right, right.
time has something to play with the overall story. So
Right.
then it makes sense. If you have a story that is taking place only over a course of a day or two or three, then yeah, you probably do need to break it up, and it's going to be an afternoon or evening. But if it's evening, in my mind, it's night. If it's afternoon, it's day. Like, it's pretty much the same thing. And that's usually what people are more used to noticing in the scene headings or slug lines or whatever we call them. So yeah, for me, it's much more of you got to have a reason to be using those.
Yeah, look, if it's readable, it's working. You
That's
know,
true.
if
Yeah.
it's not distracting, it's working. If you're getting caught up with these little things, you know, you got to focus on the story.
Right.
So this is what I mean by people are sort of obsessed with rules. They want to make sure that they've checked every single box, and they actually forget to like do the things to the story that they need, you know, which is to make them wildly exciting or unpredictable, or,
Right.
you know, or it's completely sad or really scary, you know?
There are a lot of times when I'm reading a script and I barely even glance at the scene heading anyway.
Yeah.
Where am I?
Yeah, exactly. Just get us involved and not noticing these certain things.
Yeah. Here's a good question about rules. What about the rule that scenes should be of a certain length? Should they be short, 2 pages? Marriage Story violates this. Also, that film is very heavy on dialogue, which some people say is a no-no. What do you think?
I just say vary it so that your reader doesn't get comfortable with your patterns and start to skim your script. Like, oh, this is just somebody who just does these long overrun the script. Here we go. They're fighting again. They're talking again, right? So instead, you want to throw the reader off. Okay, there might be some like short, visually impactful scene followed by a long scene that's well worth it. So I don't you know, have any magic number with this kind of stuff.
Here's a slightly different question. I'm going to do one more after this one, everybody. These are all such great questions, and I apologize that we're not able to get to everybody. But Emily's asking something a little bit beyond the formatting, but I think it's a good question because I'm curious to see what you think. So, advice for working on your story idea before you start to write. I mean, this is a huge question, obviously, but the early conceptualization process.
Advice for working on your story idea before you start to write. So there's so many different ways in, but you know, there's a reason that we focus on the log line so much. And it's because if you can communicate what your hook is and your heart is in one sentence and keep playing with that until you make sure that it really is about something different, great, go. It's a go. You know, go for that story. If you write it and it constantly comes off as formula or a movie that you've seen before, you need to keep working at, you know, what really is the hook? What's special about the story? So that is where I would start. And then from there, you know, there's a lot of different breaking story techniques. I have several, but that's where I'd start from.
Yeah. Here's a nice little plug that we'll finish on for you, Pilar. So, are you allowed to share if you've had any students who have gone on to successful careers?
Yeah. Oh, God. Gosh, so I have students and showrunners. And if you guys listen to my podcast, we go to the On the Page podcast, 3/4 of those guests were my clients and students. So for example, I just had Liz Tigelaar on there who wrote Little Fires Everywhere. She's the showrunner for Little Fires Everywhere. So she was a student of mine. Was she already a TV writer when she took the class? Yes. But you know, watching her get more and more successful is great. Charmaine de Crotté, who, gosh, I can't even keep up with her credits anymore. She started on the 100, but she started with me from scratch.
Nice.
And recently, oh gosh, it pretty much like, again, listen to the podcast and see that list of guests. And
Yeah, I
most
mean, your
of work.
bio, many of my students, top competitions, Nickel Fellowship, work on TV shows as Homeland, The 100, Dear White People, Grey's Anatomy, Silicon Valley, The Chi, sold feature films and pitches to Netflix, Sony, Warner Brothers. So it's a testament to how well you work with writers and you know, just how much time you've put into all of this. And so, you know, bravo, man, keep going.
Thank you. I'm really proud of my writers. They work hard.
Well, we're grateful to have you on here. Sorry to everyone who I wasn't able to get to everybody's questions. I love how participatory everybody was. It was a great turnout. Thank you again, Pilar. And everybody, you should go to onthepage.tv. You should check out the ISA's page for upcoming events. We have a bunch coming up. We've got this coming Friday. If you want to share some ghost stories, we're going to be talking about some ghost and Halloween stuff.